collage really has basically been present in your entire trajectory, in your entire career. And it's fascinating that it's there since the very, very beginning.
When I went to Burnley Art School, which was my second art school, because I've been at Oldham since I was 12, the first thing we had to do was to go to bookbinding class and bind our own sketchbooks.
So that's how it began.
This is my first sketchbook. And the first item in my sketchbook and so this is when I'm 14, is a collage of my drawing of my grandparents. But it's just the influence of collage right from the very beginning. I must have seen Peter Blake's work, because that can't have been done without looking at Peter Blake, really, can it?
There's a Hamilton-esque moment and there's a Blake moment.
And I probably saw them in the colour supplements. That's probably where I saw them. But I'd already learned to draw at Oldham Art School beforehand.
Today we're going to focus on collage. And I remember always when I was actually visiting Richard Hamilton for the first time, and we had a lunch and a conversation. We talked about the fact that basically the 20th century is a kind of a collage century, because already in the early 20th century, you know, there is the Dadaists, and then of course it plays a very, very important aspect in pop art. You said we were reading about the pop art scene in the Observer color supplement, which had great picture editors like Mark Boxer and Bruce Bernard. And inside we learned about David Hockney and Peter Blake and Andy Warhol and Rauschenberg, and it was very exciting. These artists reinforced the iconography of our own time, had validity and significance, that there was nothing shameful about painting a soup can, because we live in a world of soup cans, end of quote. And it's kind of fascinating, because that's the time when your first notebook really is from, and collage is everywhere.
Richard was a heroic figure to me, because he represented, really more than anybody, the importance and the validity, and if you like, the virtue of the mechanized image. And he took away all the shame that was associated with a work of art being made that was not made by the artist's hands exclusively. Our access to that kind of work when I was young really came through, as I said, through the colour supplement magazines, and Peter Blake, David Hockney, Rauschenberg, Richard Hamilton, that was the route they came to it, because there were only one or two books really about pop art around. There's something about the introduction of collage that was fundamentally aligned to the way the period felt at the time, in the 1960s and 70s. It somehow felt like this was the right medium for the day. It was really very much about picking out from a great reservoir of available material just anything that interested you. And later on it might seem to be significant, but I honestly don't think, I cannot imagine that when I was 14, I had any idea really. You know, you can sense these things without really knowing about the background that makes them significant. It's purely instinctive. Somehow, without in any way analysing or dissecting what this meant, just by putting the pages together and then adding to those drawing or paint or other collage elements, somehow you got the spirit of what it was about.
And that's that notebook. There's something very intuitive. But in the 70s, collage becomes more systematic, and it's interesting because there are several kind of bodies of work where collage enters. Your interest in Mondrian and constructivism, which leads to interesting kind of different collages, which are more following a strict grid in a certain way. And then within this very objective grid, very personal. It's almost like an oxymoron.
There are a few things as appealing to me as an artist as having a matrix, a pattern, a grid, a repeated ornament that you then disturb. And in disturbing that, by the introduction of collaged elements or by flinging of paint onto it or whatever it is that you do, that very introduction, that very kind of disturbing of the status quo, I think that the highest form of art is improvisation. But you can't improvise unless you improvise from a position of incredible discipline. You can't successfully improvise unless you have gone over that position again and again and again in order to undermine it. Collage is really about improvisation. When you improvise and you introduce collage, as Richard Hamilton discovered so clearly, you start collaborating with the world. It's no longer just you on your own. You're in direct collaboration with your species and with the world and with nature, and bring yourself into that entirely blessed circumstance where the improvisation opens up a sort of almost direct line to God and you allow nature to come thundering through your discipline, interrupt it in such a way that brings a new truth.
Because we are now in the extreme present of these amazing collages, and it's the moment where this book is also coming together. So it's, in a way, it's an Übersicht, it's an overview. We can really see how this series grew. And can you tell us a little bit about, and tell me about the genesis of it? Because it's very fascinating that it actually initially begins with the line, it begins with drawings.
Most of my life I've painted on white backgrounds, and I started doing drawings using white pencil on black card. If you put a black line around colour, the colour leaps out much more powerfully at you. And the contrast that occurs by having a black background to a white background is more analogous to the level of colour intensity that you get in stained glass than you get in oil painting. And I think that's what drew me to it. And what I do to make these collages, I paint sheets of Velin Arches paper, which is sort of a handmade paper. Big sheets, the same size of sheets that I've used for decades. And I paint thin layers of colour over them. And you have to do it with considerable kind of urgency, or you lose the kind of dynamic authority of the brushstroke. And if you do it with a thin enough layer of paint, when that's dried, you can put another layer on top of it and you work up to 3 or 4 layers. I paint hundreds of these sheets of colour. I cut out from these sheets the colours that I need to make the smaller collages. But it looks like the light's coming from behind it. It's like it's glowing. And that's because the layers are thin enough to allow the light to pass through to the white paper underneath and then bounce back. As I kind of plough my way through this field, I'm having new ideas for stained glass all the time, not just in terms of colour or in terms of material, but in detailed ways of how you make one colour flow into another, how you hold on to a sense of the liquid nature of stained glass. And you see, I've been making my designs of stained glass out of cut-out paper and collages since I was a teenager. This is before I knew about Matisse. And it's because it's the natural way to make them. I think of every one of these collages as being an idea for a stained glass window. I can't actually imagine in my mind that they're not. All artists seek to develop a language, not that's necessarily unique to them, but that is uniquely fitted to expressing their most profound ideas and their most human notions of what it is about to be a person, to be a human being. It's a slow process developing your language, but this is kind of a speedy way of developing a language, a unique language that's entirely related to stained glass.
Prior to this amazing series, you've done the daffodils, and you've also done the night orchids, the vespers, because the vespers are also collages.
Poppies, and they are collages, some of them, yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about this incredible, presence of flowers? It's something which really became more and more important, right?
As you know, I was born in Oldham, which is just outside Manchester, and it was very much an inner city kind of experience. But when I moved at the age of 15 or 16 to Devon, to go to art school in Devon, I had one of those moments that occur in life that you never forget and that nourish you. The night we arrived in Devon and we were walking to the art school the next day down this little country lane where we rented, I saw primroses growing in the side of the banks of the little lane. I had never seen a wildflower before. I'd seen flowers, but I'd never seen a wildflower.
So that was an epiphany.
I'd never seen anything so beautiful. And I was transfixed. There was always something very odd about the idea of being a contemporary artist and painting flowers. And even Andy Warhol's very flat, mechanized images of flowers. I recall people thinking that it was almost like a kind of sellout for him to create pictures of flowers. That's not what contemporary artists do, make flowers, make flower paintings. But the fact is, if you engage intensely with any flower, it will lead you to the source of the universe. There's no escaping it. If you give it everything you've got, it will give you back so much more. Not because they are in themselves something of precious value to be adored or protected or whatever, but quite simply because I could see when I made them that I was part of nature and I had nothing to be frightened about.
And there's also a lot of hope in it, no? I mean,
yeah,
a great deal. Art is the highest form of hope.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hope in this.
Yeah, enormous optimism. Inevitably, we all die and one layer of us covers the next layer, covers the next layer. And the only thing we can rely upon as human beings is that we will ultimately expire. But because I was making these collages, the fear of expiring left me. I felt that I had achieved what it was like to be consciously aware of being part of nature.